Rain had been falling since noon, a thin, needling sheet that blurred the fence lines and turned the wagon ruts into ropes of gray sludge. Amos Cutter steadied his mare at a careful walk, coat dark with water, hat brim funneling drip after drip past the corner of his eye. He meant only to get the chest of tools to the distant line shack before dark, patch the roof, ride home, nothing more. But halfway across the open stretch he saw her. She sat in the middle of the road exactly where the two ruts crossed. No cloak, no bundle, only a deep red dress pressed flat by rain and a pair of black shoes clasped to her chest like a book she refused to read. Bare feet shone pale against the mud. She did not wave, did not rise, simply waited for the horse to reach her. Amos pulled up short, water sloshing off the saddle leather. "You alive?" he asked, voice dull from the long silence of travel. She nodded, just once. Raindrops ricocheted off her lashes. Still she made no move to stand. Amos dismounted, boots sinking. Up close, he could see the lace at her collar, shredded as if torn by briars. See the blue bruises raveling around her ankles. See that the shoes were new, the soles unscuffed. Everything about her said town, except 1,000 acres of nothing behind in every direction. "Road floods fast," he said. "You'll drown sitting." Another nod. No words. He offered a hand. She lifted herself without touching him, knees trembling as though they had forgotten weight. When she swayed, he steadied her elbow, brief, gloved, and led her to the mare. She refused the saddle. Instead, she walked behind, shoes still held tight, every step a small flinch in the raw mud. They moved east, the only direction that held shelter before dark. The line shack crouched against a rise of rock, roof ribs showing through warped shingles. Amos shoved the door, hinges groaning, and gestured her inside. The room smelled of wet pine and mouse dust, a single bunk, a cold stove, 2 cracked mugs. She took the far wall, folded herself to the floorboards, and set the shoes beside her knees like guard dogs. Amos split kindling, struck a match, coaxed flame. Orange light climbed the walls, revealing a face younger than he'd guessed, perhaps 20, but hardened by something older than weather. He ladled creek water into a dented pot, dropped coffee grounds. The hiss filled the space between them. When steam rose, he slid a mug her way. She wrapped both hands around the tin, stared into it. Rain drummed the roof. Wind patted gaps with cold fingers. He waited for a name, a destination, any scrap that would explain the sight of a woman barefoot on a road miles from any porch. None came. "I'm Amos," he offered. She sipped, swallowing rainwater as much as coffee, then whispered, "Leah." The name floated fragile, as if unused a long while. Nothing more followed. He unrolled his blanket, spread it on the bunk, motioned her to take it. Leah shook her head, settled on the floor with her shoes for pillow. Amos did not argue. He set his bedroll near the door and propped his Winchester across his knees as a habit. Thunder cracked once, then moved off. The stove ticked as pine sap burst in the heat. Deep night. Amos found himself waking each time the wind rattled the latch, half expecting riders, half fearing ghosts. Leah never slept. Her eyes glinted in the red stove light, fixed on nothing. At some hour beyond measure, she whispered, "It's quieter than I thought." He grunted, unsure if that was question or confession. Silence folded again. Dawn grayed the cracks around the door. Rain had stopped. A mist lay over the grass, each blade tipped with silver. Amos brewed more coffee, chewed hardtack, offered half. Leah nibbled, eyes on the shoes now streaked with soot where stove sparks had leapt. He saw then that the laces were tucked inside, tags still stiff, shoes bought for walking, yet never worn. "I head north to a ranch," he said. "River crossing in 5 hours. After that, nothing till Sundown Ridge." Leah placed the shoes in her lap, fingers stroking the uncreased leather. "River's fine," she said, voice steadier, controlled. "Family there?" She shook her head. "But no one asked questions about a cook." Amos considered. Riverbend Outfit did hire trail cooks each spring. He strapped on his gear. "Saddle's tall for walking," he said. "Ride or we'll not beat the crossing." This time she accepted, swing awkward but firm. She kept the shoes clutched to her stomach as he mounted behind, guiding the mare into morning. They traveled in silence. Sun burned mist to ribbons, Meadowlarks tried songs against the damp. Leah's hair dried in snarls, dark strands whipping across his sleeve. Twice he felt her spine stiffen at distant hoofbeats, but only jackrabbits bolted across their path. Near noon they reached the river, brown, swollen but fordable. Leah watched water swirl around the mare's hocks, jaw clenched until they stepped onto high gravel. A half-mile beyond, ruins showed, a coach overturned, wheels snapped, harness cut. Fresh ashes marked where canvas had burned. No bodies, only a bustle half buried in mud, and a scattering of coins stamped with yesterday's date. Leah's breath hitched. She slid from the saddle, knelt by the bustle, wiping soot away. In the lining, a monogram shone, LG. Her fingers trembled. She tucked something small into her dress, then stood. Stage was ambushed, Amos said. You were aboard? She shook her head slowly. Waiting to board, maybe. Eyes drifted to the tree line where vultures circled. They drew lots. Those with gold rode. Others walked. Walked to where? A single tear carved a clean line down her dust. Here. Amos wanted to ask more. About bruises, about men who would leave a woman barefoot in rain. But the road bent toward North Light. He remounted, extended a hand. She hesitated, then placed the precious shoes into his saddlebag, as if trusting him with her one possession. When he lifted her again, she leaned back just enough that he could feel her heartbeat through his coat. By sundown, the ranch roofs winked tin against amber sky. Hands watched from the gate as Amos rode in with a stranger in lace. He dismounted, spoke to the foreman, explained little beyond cook found on the road. The man shrugged. Trail season needed all manner of souls. Leah slid down, feet touching the packed earth of a yard smelling of hay and horses. She faced Amos. Shoes stay off until souls earn ground, she said. He nodded. Words felt inadequate. She pressed into his palm the object from the bustle, a silver thimble engraved mother. Trade, she whispered, for coffee. Amos closed his fist around the thimble. Coffee's free, he answered. Leah smiled, tiny, real. Then keep it. Remind you someone kept walking. The cook shack door opened. Lamplight spilled. Leah stepped inside without looking back, bare feet silent on wood. Amos stood until the light swallowed her, until night gathered him like a coat. He touched the thimble, slipped it into his pocket beside things too small to trade away. Spent cartridges, a faded ribbon from a girl once promised. Then he turned toward the bunkhouse. Somewhere a nighthawk cried. Somewhere a woman he'd met in rain was learning the names of stoves and ladles, and perhaps, come morning, the names of men who wouldn't ask where she'd left her footsteps. On the road behind, 2 black shoes sat forgotten in his saddlebags, still new, still unlaced, waiting for a future that might one day be gentle enough to fit them. The bunkhouse came alive long before sunrise. First clank, the cook shack stovepipe coughing yesterday's ash. Second, coffee pot settling on iron. Each echoed across the yard like a slow drum roll for dawn. Leah stood in that hush with sleeves rolled and new bruises blooming yellow at her wrists. She moved through the cramped kitchen as though she'd traced every nailhead in sleep. Water, grounds, salt, beans, measured by memory rather than cup. Outside, cow hands muttered awake, boots thumping in search of socks still damp from the last crossing. Amos, bedroll under one arm, watched her load biscuits onto a battered pan. She hadn't spoken more than a dozen words since the river, only nodded at the foreman, nodded at the bunk she'd been given behind the stove, nodded when Amos offered his blanket because her corner leaked wind. Yet she worked as if she owed the world a debt keyed to sunrise. The first hand through the door was Long Tom. Had always 2 sizes too small, eyes 2 shades too sharp. He sniffed, lifted the lid, and grunted approval. Leah slid a plate across, never meeting his gaze. Tom found that curious. Cowboys counted stories by scars, and quiet scars made them itch. More filed in. Biscuit baskets emptied. The ranch yard shifted from gray to pearl. Amos carried his plate outside, leaned on the corral rail, steam curling from tin. When Leah stepped out with the coffee pot for refills, muley cattle lowed in the near field. The sound rolled over her like a soft challenge. She tipped Amos's cup. You staying? He asked low. She shrugged, eyes on distant fence posts. Day at a time. Road ends quieter here. Her voice held no fear, only a practiced caution, as if each syllable cost another mile of walking barefoot. By mid-morning, the herd pushed toward the East Range. Dust rose, hung in the new sun. Leah scrubbed pots, then wandered the fence line with a bucket for gooseberries. Amos rode perimeter, tool chest strapped to the saddle. From the ridge, he saw her crimson dress threading the sage, feet still bare, though ground baked hard as skillet iron. He felt the reach of distance and the tug of worry, but let the horizon ride between. At noon, the foreman barked her name. He had only ever called her Cook, but she corrected him once. A supply wagon needed loading, sacks of sorghum, a crate of tin plates, one wooden box marked Dodge Citibank, sealed. The driver, a Pinkerton hired guard, kept his hand on the box even while lighting a cigar. Leah hoisted sorghum without glancing at the man or the gun smoke curling from his grin. Night brought a storm that never found thunder, just heat lightning flickering across the plains, showing ghost herds in the sky. Amos mended tack under the lantern. Leah stitched torn feed sacks in the doorway to catch both light and wind. Silence lay comfortable until Long Tom ambled over, whiskey on his breath, curiosity sharpened like a file. "Town girl," he mused, leaning too close. "What brand sent you walking with no boots on?" Leah kept stitching. "Brand that burned." Tom laughed, but it faltered. "Maybe tell us which trail to avoid." Amos rose before Leah could shape a reply. "Trails out of maps," he said. Tone left no room for more. Tom saluted with empty cup and drifted back to bunkhouse darkness. Leah's needle never paused, but her shoulders eased half an inch. Amos marked the measure. Days settled into wary rhythm. Leah's biscuits rose tall, hands rode out fed, and returned asking seconds. She saved berry seeds in a rusted tobacco tin, said soil at the fence line might nurse them if frost held off. Amos set posts by moonlight, found himself checking her tin's progress every morning before saddle cinch. The wagon from Dodge returned fortnightly, Pinkerton still perched like a crow on the sealed box. Rumor said wages for railbed graders south of the county. Second rumor said the cash never reached graders, but funded deputies who made trouble vanish before investors visited. Leah listened without comment, but Amos saw her jaw tighten each time the driver flicked ash near her cook fire, as if ash weighed more than coin. One hot dusk, Amos unsaddled to find Leah kneeling by the supply shed door, ear to wood. Inside, muffled banging, a man's ragged breath. Pinkerton guards sprawled unconscious by the stoop, head gashed, box lid pried open, stacked bills wrapped in bank tape. Leah pressed a finger to her lips, unlatched the door. A boy tumbled out, 17 at most, wrists bound, dust caked on blood at his temple. "Rail grader," he gasped, "caught lifting supper scraps. Said I'd learn honesty." His eyes met Leah's bare feet, then flicked to the money inside the crate. Hoofbeats, driver returning. Leah's hand darted, grabbed the boy, shoved him toward the cottonwoods. Amos blocked the wagon trail, hammer looped loose. Driver saw the guard, swore, reached for his revolver, then froze at Amos's stare. A look carved from nights without answers on the war front. Leah, meanwhile, tipped the crate, spilled bills into the dark mud. Rain clouds chose that instant to break. Ink bled, paper dissolved like snowflakes. The wagon driver dismounted, cursing as fortune soaked to slurry. Foreman arrived running, rifle up, halted at the scene. Leah met his eyes. "Your wages reach the soil at least." Foreman's gaze slid to Amos, then to the unconscious guard, then to the boy vanishing among trees. He spat, shouldered the Pinkerton onto the wagon bed, and ordered the driver to haul both the ruined money and the stink of it south by daylight. No questions. That night, Leah scrubbed mud from her hands until skin reddened. Amos sat on the stoop, rain tapping his hat brim. "Stage lot?" he asked finally, 2 words carrying larger ones. She exhaled. "Town banker bribed Pinkertons to empty coaches on quiet roads. Blame bandits later." She flexed sore fingers. "Shoes were hush money for the living. I wouldn't wear what screams." Amos nodded as if a ledger page had balanced. He pulled off his own boots, set them next to her bare feet in warm puddle water, and spoke slow. "Roads long enough for 2 sets of scars." Leah stared at the boots, then at the man who seemed to stand barefoot inside her silence. Lightning flickered once, painting the yard silver. When dark returned, she leaned her shoulder against his. They sat until rain quit, listening to the quiet they had purchased with soaked banknotes and one bold push at a shack door. Before dawn, Leah placed the tobacco tin of seeds on Amos's saddlebags. "For after fences," she said. He tightened the cinch, eyed the eastern sky, hinting pink. "After fences," he agreed, and rode out, wondering how berry vines might thread through barbed wire come some forgiving spring. July's heat pressed the plains flat, turning every breath inside the cook shack into steam. Leah wiped her brow with the hem of her red dress, now patched and shortened to working length, and swung the coffee pot off the iron grate. Outside, Amos fitted a new hinge on the feed shed door, his hammer cadence matching the creak of the windmill that grudgingly hauled muddy water from 40 feet down. 1 month had passed since the rainy road meeting, and the ranch had already rewritten its daily rhythm around the quiet woman who cooked barefoot at dawn. The hands no longer asked where she came from. They measured her in biscuits and the soft whistle she used to call the barn cats. Long Tom, once itching for her story, now boasted that his cook could stretch beans over 3 meals and still leave room for peach cobbler. Even the foreman, whose nearest nod to praise was silence, began leaving the ration ledger open for her neat script. Amos noticed subtler signs. The bruises on Leah's ankles faded, traded for the rough proof of new calluses. Her shoulders lost that flinch whenever riders passed the yard. At night, when chores were burned down to embers, she and Amos sometimes sat on the half-built fence above the creek, toes dangling, boots dangling, hers still hanging from pegs inside the bunkhouse, his now resting side by side beside them, like a pact in leather. One such evening, Amos pulled a battered harmonica from his coat. "Found it in a tack box," he said. Leah wrapped her fingers around the cold metal, pressed it to her lips, and blew. Only once, soft, a single uncertain note that drifted off toward sunset. She handed it back. "Maybe later," she murmured. Her voice no longer cracked on every word, yet she rationed it like lamp oil. In late August, dust devils carried rumor ahead of riders. A telegraph courier brought word from Harmon Junction. Banker Clayton Hughes had posted a bounty for the barefoot woman who stole from his payroll wagon. $500, dead or alive. The Pinkerton agency tacked the notice to depot walls. Sheriff Gable wired through. "Watch your yard, Amos. Hughes pays dogs to hunt." Amos said nothing until after supper. He found Leah rinsing pans in the starlit trough, sleeves rolled. "Posters up," he told her. She nodded as if the sky's chill already whispered the same. Her face tightened, but instead of fear, he saw calculation. She dried her hands, returned to the cook shack, and emerged with a strip of parchment, a half-charred list of rail stops, banker's name scrawled beside each. "He rides money east," she said. "Keeps none for workers." Amos traced the inked towns with a callous thumb, saw how close the lines snaked to their county, how many empty coach shells it left behind. He folded the paper. "We'll keep watch." Leah lowered a bucket into the trough, staring at the waters tremble. "Watch won't stop gold," she whispered. Amos answered with the blunt truth of a hand resting on her shoulder. Steady, promising. Autumn brought promise of pay. Trail herds rolled in from summer graze. Cash boxes followed, locked tight beneath armed eyes. The first time Leah saw a Pinkerton jacket stride through the gate, she stiffened, ladle pausing mid-stir. The guard scanned the yard, lingering on her dress's bright fabric. Amos appeared from the tack shed, hammer in one fist as if it belonged there naturally. The guard's gaze flicked to the tool, then away. He said only, "Supply wagon arrives next week," and rode out, boots drumming threats in their echo. That night, Leah retrieved the berry seed tin from under her bunk. "Ground soon," she said. Amos nodded, understanding the code. Roots make staying harder to uproot. They planted on a cool September dusk. Leah walked the fence line, dropping gooseberry seeds into thumb-pressed pockets of soil every 10 paces. Amos followed with the heel of his boot, covering each promise. When finished, they stood side by side, watching the horizon swallow the last wedge of sun. Leah inhaled deep, tasting dust and hope mingled. "If the birds take half, we still win." Amos smiled. Birds aren't fond of thorns. Gooseberries fight back. The supply wagon rolled in under a copper dawn 2 weeks later. Boxy, tar-lined, pulled by two tired sorrels. Beside the driver sat the same Pinkerton guard, coat immaculate, rifle across his knees. The crate he guarded was cedar, iron-banded, its brand burned deep. DODGECITYBANK. Foreman directed the wagon to the tool shed. Hands swarmed to unload feed sacks and lamp oil. The guard remained atop his perch, eyes sweeping for anything crimson or shoeless. Leah slipped a bandana over her hair, stood at the cook shack door, eyes down. The guard's stare crawled over her, but landed on nothing he could name. When he dismounted to stretch, Amos was there, leaning on a post, discussing wheel rims that needed retightening. By noon, the Pinkerton decided a hot meal outweighed suspicion and accepted a plate of Leah's beans. She served him with measured courtesy, never turning her back. In the clutter of midday chores, no one saw her pocket the guard's dropped matchbook. No one except Amos. That night he found her behind the shed, scraping the match strikers into a pile, collecting the phosphor dust in a cloth. "Cold fire," she said, meeting his question. "Just in case." Then she scattered the empty book to win. October hardened the land again. First frost silvered the gooseberry rows Leah had planted, but she smiled at the sight. Thorn stems, needle sharp, alive. The Pinkerton wagon returned, this time missing its driver. The guard said little, eyes haunted. He took his meal inside, alone, and left without thanks. Leah watched him vanish down the lane, then looked at Amos. "Dogs barking at ghosts." Amos squeezed her hand. "Ghosts bite back." 3 nights later, she was proven right. The guard returned under moonlight, alone, stumbling drunk, pistol swinging. He hammered the bunkhouse door, yelling her name. "Red dress, barefoot witch." Words slurred. Hands stumbled out, half-booted. The guard staggered, eyes crazed. "Bank's empty. She bled it," he snarled, waving a telegram that claimed Clayton Hughes had been indicted for fraud. The guard's employer gone, bounty worthless. He blamed the woman who wouldn't speak her past. Amos stepped forward, rifle cradled. "Road's done with you." The guard raised his pistol. Leah's hand moved faster, flinging the cloth of phosphor dust into his face. Sparks lit brief as shooting stars. The guard stumbled, blinded, gun firing skyward. Hands pinned him. Sheriff Gable, roused from the foreman's office, shackled the man for the ride to Harmon Junction. Before dawn, frost melted on fuse powder still glittering in dirt. Leah's cold fire plan spent without flame. Amos gathered the sparkling dust in his palm, poured it at the base of the strongest gooseberry shoot. "Even sparks feed roots," he said. Leah leaned into him, exhaled trembling, but not from fear. November winds carried wood smoke in longhorn bellows. Leah finally laced her black shoes, the hide softened by nights near her bunk stove. She walked the yard once, testing soles on frozen dung, then kicked them off by the porch. "Too tight," she joked. Amos laughed, rolled his eyes, left the shoes neatly under the bench. Maybe spring would stretch them right. Ranch hands pooled wages to buy Leah a gift, a new cast-iron Dutch oven imported from back east. She traced the lid engraving, 2 wheat sheaves crossed, and blinked hard, smile wrung out wet. Supper that night tasted of bread, baked on open coals, steam carrying rosemary and unspoken gratitude. After dishes, Amos unfolded an envelope, yellowed, edges soft. Inside lay title papers the foreman had sent to the county clerk. 5 acres on the ridge, and a note calling it Cook's Rest. Leah read the words, lips parted. "Land's half yours," Amos said. She pressed the paper against her chest. "Half isn't math, Amos. It's promise." They walked the ridge before freeze-up, surveying the plot. Cottonwoods leaning like tired guards, creek looping gentle, soil thin but patient. Leah knelt beside the tallest gooseberry sprout rooted in fence shadow. "Spring," she said. Amos nodded, one word enough. As December crept, snow seeded the wind again. The bunkhouse windows glowed amber. Jackknife stars pricked a sky broadcast with frost. Leah stirred beans for the bedroll crowd, humming the first line of a tune only Amos had heard on that borrowed harmonica. Hands quieted, listening. Amos met her gaze across the flame. She finished the bar, then set the spoon aside, wiping palms on her patched dress. Outside, hoofbeats faded. No Pinkertons, no dogs. Inside, fire snapped warm. The seed tin rested by the window, and two pairs of shoes, one scuffed, one waiting, sat beneath the porch bench like punctuation marks at the end of a season neither of them had expected to survive. Winter would bring ice and threats on paper, but that lay beyond tomorrow's dawn. For tonight the ledger read balanced. Dust paid in labor, fear paid in courage, and every line closed clean with the one currency the banker never counted: quiet. Snow sifted over the ridge for 3 straight days, fine as sifted flour. By the time the sky emptied, drifts braced themselves thigh-high against cook shack logs and buried the gooseberry rows in a single, silent blanket. Amos shoveled a path wide enough for one set of boots and one set of bare footprints. Leah still refused her shoes but stuffed wool rags between toes like secret fires. She boiled beans, counted flour, wrote biscuit yields in the ration ledger with hands that barely trembled now. Nights tightened small as a fist. The bunkhouse crowd huddled in quilts, arguing poker hands with breath showing. In the corner of the cook shack, Leah's Dutch oven glowed red. She dipped ladles and listened, half her hearing tuned for hoofbeats that might rake the frozen ground. Amos sat nearby, sanding a length of spruce that would become the ridge cabin's first rafter once thaw set loose the soil. One blue glass dawn, Sheriff Gable returned from Harmon Junction with news that shredded the quiet. Banker Clayton Hughes had skipped bail and hauled west under assumed name. Bounty repainted bigger. Pinkerton offices offered double to whoever found Leah of the red dress. The sheriff whispered this at the stove while steam curled around their knees. Leah nodded once, tore the latest Gazette proof into squares, and fed them to the flames. Old headlines were tinder. New fears needed empty paper. Amos rode patrol that week with Ruth and Long Tom. Coyote tracks circled calves. No human sign. Still on the ridge, he reset traps wired with bells. Wind rang them like nervous chimes each night. Leah learned the tune, slept light. Christmas Eve fell brittle and clear. Foreman allowed half-day work. Leah roasted dried apples with spices she'd hidden in her sewing tin. As dusk spilled copper, the hands pressed into the cook shack, cheeks stung pink, pockets rattling with small tokens. A silver button, a carved bone whistle, a stub of pencil, offerings for the woman who fed their ribs and scolded none. They piled gifts on the table like children building a fort. Leah blinked, speechless, then set every item in a coffee tin labeled Grace. Amos's gift waited outside. 2 cedar planks planed smooth, edges tongue and groove, the first floorboards of their cabin. He laid them in Leah's arms, watching her trace grain lines as if learning secret roads. "Will the rest come?" she asked. "Day by day," he said, voice soft as stove ash. She held the wood close until fingers warmed the frost. Midnight. Leah finally raised the harmonica, pressed lips, released the tune she had practiced in embers glow. The hymn floated through knot cracks, sailed over sleeping cattle, reached the ridge where snow caught it and gave it silver breath. Amos closed his eyes. Long Tom muttered it sounded like church without pews. Deep winter arrived carrying teeth, ice storms that cracked fence posts, wolves drawn thin by hunger. One black night bells clanged hard, not wind. Amos bolted from his bunk. Wolves scattered at rifles' bark. But he found the south gate hacked, tracks of 2 men on shod horses running hard toward the county road. They returned with dawn. The riders. Pinkerton blue coats, Hughes's payment sewn into inner pockets. Leah saw them crest the ridge, eyes like shards. She stoked the forge fire they used for shoeing, poured lamp oil on cedar shavings, and waited. Amos and Ruth took positions behind hay bales iced to stone. The Pinkertons halted within shouting distance. "Turn over the thief!" one barked. Leah stepped from the forge, flames licking behind, furnace glare dressing her lace-torn dress in devil gold. Bare feet steamed on snow. In her hands, Amos's plain-shaved cedar board, edges still raw. "She's wood and smoke," the younger agent murmured. The older shoved forward, pistol raised. Leah lifted the board. On its face, she had burned one word with a hot horseshoe nail: quiet. She held it up like scripture, then hurled it into the forge. Cedar whooshed, word turning to pure light. Wind snapped, flinging sparks at the horses. Animals shied, hooves skating, gun fired wild. Amos's rifle answered, slug punching the snow a yard wide of the elder agent's boot. Warning, not blood. The younger man threw down his revolver, hands lifted high. No bounty buys this, he stammered. Elder spat curses, but when Ruth racked her shotgun, he followed suit, disarmed. Sheriff Gable arrived at a gallop. He'd shadowed the riders all night. Pinkertons were cuffed, disarmed, marched into bunkhouse cellar to thaw on the wrong side of a locked hatch. Their horses and gear were payment for broken fence. That evening, Leah pulled the cedar board's charred remnant from the ashes. The word was gone, but grain still ran straight, edges perfect. She brushed soot away, handed it to Amos. Floor needs stories, she said. He nodded, set it aside. First plank burned, second to be polished, both part of home. February melt surprised them. Warm breath, steaming frost from nails. Amos, Leah, Ruth, and 3 willing hands dragged logs to the ridge, notching walls by starlight. Foreman lent his broad axe. Sheriff hauled straw for chinking. Even the younger Pinkerton, now working off his crime, plain siding smooth, grateful for hot meals and freedom from the agency's ledger. Day by day, the cabin rose. 4 walls, a roof frame, eager for shingles. Leah laid her cast-iron Dutch oven on the new hearth, hammered it in place with spoon ring tapping each brick. Root, she whispered to the oven, to herself, to the wind. On Equinox Eve, Amos fit the scarred saddle over a window beam, perch for memory. They nailed the last roof plank by lantern. Leah pressed her palm print into wet mud mortar, and beside it Amos pressed his, larger. 2 prints, story-bound. When gooseberry shoots pierced snow-rot soil in early March, Leah laughed, boots forgotten on doorstep. She picked the first green tip, tasted sour promise. Behind her the cabin door hung true, the beam scar saddle watching like an old guardian. Banker Hughes's name went stale in newspapers. Bounty posters peeled off depot walls. Ink washed by rain, none bothered to escape. Spring rode in lighter than any of them remembered. Bees worried the gooseberry blossoms. Cattle dropped shiny calves. A new harmonica tune wound through the ridge cabin windows at dusk, stumbling then steady, 2 parts, then a third, until the night air itself carried harmony. Inside, Amos set the plane on cedar floorboards, rough edges gone. Leah rocked the Grace tin, button, whistle, pencil clattering, and added 1 gooseberry leaf, its green curled into silver shape, as though telling her even thorn things could soften under roof-filtered sun. They banked the lamp. Outside, the prairie stretched dark, quiet, and wide. Inside, wood smoke etched circles on rafters, as if drawing rings around the one word burned, then reborn in every board: home. Gooseberries ripened into jade marbles, heavy for vines still thin. Leah knelt at dawn, thumbed each fruit, whispered patience the way wind hushes grass before storm. Behind her the ridge cabin breathed pine sweet, the raw wood Amos had planed now honeyed by sun. Smoke rose from the stone flue, beans simmered, coffee thickening. Summer had arrived without bang or bounty posters, the quietest season Clay Ridge could remember. Yet small tremors threaded town talk. A telegram spotted in Harmon Junction. Banker Clayton Hughes rumored east of the divide, tracing debts that hadn't drowned in cold courts. Amos oiled the Winchester, not from fear, from habit, set it in the corner and returned to chiseling window trim. Leah watched sawdust pool like pale river sand and told herself dust was only dust. In late July, Foreman rode up with a sealed envelope. County clerk's seal, blue ribbon. Deed final, taxes nil for veterans. Amos signed, Leah beneath him, their names tight together like 2 planks locked tongue and groove. Foreman smiled, said the ridge was official, Cutterstone Homestead. Amos chuckled after he left. Your name first, Leah teased. Amos grinned, tapped his scar. Alphabet owes me one. They hung the deed over the hearth with a horseshoe nail. Under it, Leah placed the grace tin. It rattled now with 4 gooseberries dried hard, 1 silver button, 1 bullet flat as a coin, and a folded Gazette headline that read, "Ink outsprints iron." She closed the lid, exhaled. August sun baked the creek to half its spring width. Hands rode out for second haycut. Leah packed lunches, bread, salt pork, slices of spiced apple dried last winter. She and Amos walked fences, checking wire tension. No hoof prints but their own. Night came warm. Crickets tuned the dark. One evening, the heat had broken, air lavender in the cool. Leah sat on the porch rail, black town shoes beside her, laces finely threaded. She hadn't worn them since the river. She lifted one, weighed it. Amos glanced up from sharpening a draw knife. "You going somewhere?" Leah shook her head, waiting to see if they fit. She slipped the shoe on, tied a slow knot, stood. Leather creaked but didn't pinch. She crossed the porch once, twice, sanded floor warm under sole. Then she kicked the shoe off, set it back on the rail, smiled shy. "Maybe tomorrow." Amos laughed soft, returned to steel on steel. At moonrise, they heard distant clip-clop, single horse, no pack. Amos's hand froze over the rifle but did not lift it. Leah listened, head tilted. Hoofbeats veered south toward the old freight road, not the ridge. They exhaled together, returned inside, leaving the shoes like twin sentries. Hughes appeared 2 days later, not on a horse, but in a black buckboard driven by a wiry man with city gloves. He stopped in Clay Ridge proper, spoke to no one, demanded Sheriff Gable serve a warrant for theft and arson. Gable read the document, saw its date months stale, saw the judge's signature missing. He folded it once, handed it back. "Paper's got no legs here," he said. Hughes's cheeks blazed, but he smiled thin. He purchased supplies, salt, lamp oil, coils of hemp, loaded them, then steered the buckboard toward the ridge road, ignoring the sheriff's warning. Dust trailed like smoke. Leah was trimming herb bundles when Amos's shout rose from the pasture. "Wagon coming." She tucked scissors into apron, stepped barefoot onto the hardened earth. Hughes halted below the walnut, recognized her at once. "Price on your head still good south of the line," he called. "Come quiet and I'll let the ranch stand." Amos walked forward, hammer dangling. "Paper died in the snow," he said. Hughes climbed down, produced a revolver polished too much to see work. The driver, nervous, kept reins tight. Leah stepped off the porch, bare feet silent. She carried one black shoe. "You want payment?" she asked. Hughes sneered. "All wages you cost me." She offered the shoe. He laughed, a dry snap. "Mocking me?" Leah shook her head. "Payment. Memory." She set the shoe on the fence post, toe pointing west. Hughes's laugh faded, unease flickered. He hadn't expected calm. Leah spoke low. "I left a road barefoot. I keep land barefoot. Shoe's yours if you can carry it." Hughes lifted the revolver, sight unsteady. Behind him, the driver whispered a prayer. Amos raised the hammer, but Leah's raised hand stopped him. She leveled her gaze at Hughes. "Iron doesn't bend for dust," she said. The sentence she'd whispered to beans and fences and every dawn since. Wind picked up. Summer gust, sharp with sage. It caught the shoe, knocked it from the post. Leather thudded in dust at Hughes's boots. He flinched as if a ghost had spat. The walnut creaked. A green fruit let go, striking the wagon cover like a warning gavel. Hughes's trigger finger twitched but didn't pull. Sheriff Gable's horse topped the rise then, rifle across his arms. He had followed the dust trail. Hughes glanced between badge and cabin. Quiet grew thick as honey. Finally, he holstered the gun, grabbed the shoe, tossed it into the buckboard. "Rot in dust," he muttered. He turned the team, leather reins snapping. They watched him vanish into heat shimmer, heading toward that freight road where vultures circled memories. Sheriff tipped hat, rode on, no words. Leah exhaled once. Long. Amos touched her shoulder. She bent, retrieved the mate's shoe still on the rail, set it beside the empty spot. "Some things need pairs," she said. Amos answered by unlacing his boots, setting them neatly next to hers. Barefoot together, they stepped into the yard's baked dirt, feeling ground pulse warm. Harvest arrived early. gooseberries purple on thorn, beans fat in pods. Leah worked the Dutch oven over outdoor coals, baking loaves for every hand. After supper, Amos fetched the battered harmonica. Leah pulled a fiddle, a gift from Ida, under her chin. They played a reel crooked but happy. Long Tom clapped rhythm. Even the stoic foreman tapped heel. When the tune ended, Amos lifted his voice for the first time in song, rough, unsure. Leah joined, steadied the notes. The cabin windows glowed, porch boards hummed. Up on the walnut branch, a lone raven watched, feathers ruffling in dusk breeze, the same riffled black as Banker's threats, now harmless. Later, Leah walked to the fence line under a sky-bruised indigo. Star lanterns pricked. She held both shoes, placed them sole to sole beneath the walnut, laces tied together. For travelers, she whispered, if roads turn cruel. She kissed Amos's cheek, tasted pine dust and night air. Inside, the grace tin rattled as she added 2 purple gooseberries, fruit of thorn and patience. She latched the lid, set it by the hearth under the deed. Amos banked the lamp, traced her hand with calloused thumb. Roof held, he said. Leah answered, roots reached. They lay beneath the saddle beam, listening to wind comb the grass, to walnuts thudding soft, to no guns, no papers, only the slow, steady breathing of a house that would wake in morning, still theirs. And somewhere beyond the ridge, a banker carried one black shoe through endless dust, a reminder that some debts can't be paid with coin, only with the quiet he never learned to earn.